This conference will now be recorded.
All right. Henry also has to get another shot, so be praying for Henry and his shot that he's going to be getting for his eye. All right, guys, we're going to be looking at 1 Samuel still. We're plowing through 1 Samuel. So if you want to pull it up your phones or pull your Bibles out, we are going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 5. So I'm going to go ahead and pull it up on my computer so I can share that. But if you remember from last week, what happened last week was we were in the middle of the battle where the Philistines were attacking and raiding Israel, and the Israel army went out to fight them, and they had a large number of people defeated, 4,000 or 3,000, not 30,000, 3,000. And then they took the Ark of the Covenant into the battle, hoping to manipulate God and to ask him to help him out. And when they did that, it ended up getting the Ark of the Covenant captured by the Philistines, and the Philistines took it into their territory. So what we're reading about today is we're going to read about today on what happened when the Ark of the Covenant, because remember, the Ark of the Covenant is the presence of God. That's where God hung out in the tabernacle, and then later in the temple. That's where his presence was. And that's where the people went to offer the sacrifices and all of that. And that's that's what they took. And last week we learned that Eli died when he found the news that his two sons and the Ark of the Covenant had been captured by the Philistines. So it's just this really crazy time that's going on with them. So we're going to be in 1 Samuel. There's only 12 verses in 1 Samuel chapter 5, so we might get through this pretty quick today, but we're gonna look at it. So this is 1 Samuel chapter 5, verses 1 through 3. It says, after the Philistines captured the Ark of God, they took it from the battleground at Ebenezer to the town of Ashdod. Okay, real quick, you're going to see three cities mentioned in this chapter, and three of these cities, the three cities are three of the five major cities. So the way Philistine was organized is that they had five major cities, and each one of those major cities kind of had a ruler or a leader. I wouldn't say a king, but they had a ruler or a leader. So the first one that we see here is Ashdod, and Ashdod would be kind of considered the major one of Philistine, the Philistine people, and that's where they took it. So they took the Ark of the God from the battleground at Ebenezer to the town of Ashdod. They carried the Ark of God into the temple of Dagon and placed it beside an idol of Dagon. Okay, so just the Philistine people, they were not like Israel. Philistine people had many different idols. And each of these five different towns and in other places throughout Philistine, they had these places where they had gods that they worshiped. So they worshipped many gods. And Dagon is the one, the temple that they take him into. And Dagon would be considered a fertility god. So they worshipped Dagon in hopes that Dagon would bless their crops and let them have lots of good crops, that the herds of animals have more babies, and that they themselves as the people could have more babies. So Dagon is a god that would be considered a fertility god. So they carried the Ark of the God into the temple and placed it beside an idol of Dagon. First thing I want to look at there is idol. When you hear the word idol, what do you think of? What is an idol? A false god? A statue? I think in our terminology, we have American Idol, you know, and really it is, there's always been Hollywood idols or sports people that we just think are great and wonderful, and we kind of worship them. It's like, oh, that's Babe Ruth, or that's Bon Jovi, or whoever. That's a Def Leppard. Whoever it is, we kind of worship them, and we put them in a place. But an idol, it's many times an idol is a carven statue, or it's a metal made out of metals or anything, and it's something that it doesn't really have any power at all, but the people give it power in their own minds, and the idols might be representing something else, some other kind of spiritual realm that's going on out there that's not good and not of God, but the people would go in and they would worship these idols. But really, I think the best definition of the word idol in the context of Christianity and Scripture is an idol is anything that we put above God. It's anything that we put above God. The first commandment is that I am the Lord your God, and you shall have no other gods before me. You should have no other idols before me. You should have no other gods before me. You should not worship anything else. And when we think about it in our day and age, while there are still some cultures in the world that might have carven images or images made of gold or silver where people go in and they pray to those images or whatever. Most of the world doesn't have that kind of stuff, but we do have idols. And I was thinking about it. What kind of idols do we have in the world right now? So often, I think some of the idols that we have would be, our jobs, power, possessions. We think that our job is the most important thing in our life. We think that our stuff is the most important thing in our life. We think that our money is the most important thing in our life, and we spend all of our time focusing on those things. And sometimes it's, I know people that just darn near worship the Dallas Cowboys or the Texas Tech Raiders. Really, there are people that are obsessed with these, and I am a fan. I am a fanatic when it comes to sports, but I also don't think there are some people that they live their life, for those sports teams, and their well-being is directly related on how well that sports team does or how poorly that team does. And I think this is one. I have seen many folks make their marriage an idol. And this is probably the one that I struggle with the most, is that so often I catch myself, and the most important thing in my life is my marriage with Jody. And while it needs to be at the top of my list of priorities, it doesn't need to be at the very top of my list of priorities. And there are times that I'm more concerned about pleasing Jody or making sure, and I'm not even giving a thought to what God might want in that. So this idol, I think it's real interesting, because as we look through this chapter, we're going to be looking through the context of God being compared to an idol and how God views idols. Okay, Dagon, the statue that was representing Dagon, was an idol that represented how the people were obsessed with fertility and their crops doing good and their herds multiplying and all of this. So it's something that they were putting above God. So when they carried it in, I found this interesting. They carried the Ark of the Temple of God into the Temple of Dagon, and they placed it beside the idol of Dagon. Why do you think they placed it beside the idol of Dagon? Any thoughts? For them, it was just another god. It was like they captured another god, and they were gonna, so it was a collection. It was like, we already have all these other gods and idols that we worship. Now we've got another one. So we're just going to go in here and put it in here. And when we come in and we're going to worship Dagon, we might as well just go ahead and worship this God that we captured and that we have. And as we see through chapter 5 and more importantly in chapter 6 next week, we're going to see that they had a lot of pride in that it was almost like a badge of honor, like, look what we captured. We captured, the Ark of the Covenant, and we have this God. And it was something that they were pretty prideful about, but they took it in there and they said, hey, here's one of our gods. Well, God didn't like that. So verse 3, when the citizens of Ashdod went to see it the next morning, so it comes into town, they take it into the temple, they place it next to Dagon. They walk in the next morning, and Dagon had fallen down with his face on the ground in front of the Lord. And I think that's pretty interesting, because it was kind of like God was saying, you're not going to be worshiping idols in my presence. And so and it was the way that it fell down on its face in front of God. It's almost like God was saying, no, you worship me, you worship me. So the ark, the Dagon fell down face ground in the front of the ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and they put him back, they picked him back up. So think about this. He's over here, the Ark of the Covenant is next to it. It falls down in front. I mean, so it's almost kind of like it had to move a little, unless it just went, but it fell in front of the Ark of the Covenant. So they pick him up and they take him and they put him back in his place again. So day 2 comes around. But the next morning, the same thing happened. Dagon had fallen on his face down before the ark of the Lord. Again, this time his head and his hands had broken off and were lying in the doorway. So here, I don't know what it looked like, but imagine that it's here. It falls off, the doorway's over there behind Jenny, and the head rolls over and the hands pop off and it goes over and it lands in the doorway. So here's the statue. The head falls off, rolls over the doorway. The hands walk off, land in the threshold, the doorway, and it was falling off, and it fell off. Only the trunk of his body was left intact. So I don't know what Dagon looked like, but he might have, who knows? He's going like this or what. But when he fell down, all that was left was this. And it's interesting that it says that it was lying in the doorway. Verse 5 says, that is why to this day, of course, the temple to Dagon's not there now. This was written when there was a temple to Dagon. But that is why to this day, neither the priest of Dagon nor anyone who enters the temple of Dagon in Ashdod will step on the threshold. It's almost like they were scared. They were like, God kind of conquered Dagon and broke his head off and broke his arms off. And we're not even going to touch where the remnants of Dagon was. We're not going to step on it. Then the Lord's heavy hand struck the people of Ashdod and the nearby villages with a plague of tumors. So I find it, and I think when we look at this is how God deals with idols. At first God just says, hey, knocks them down. Hey, you don't need an idol, and then it's kind of like, hey, you don't need an idol, and I'm going to break that idol. And third, hey, you keep going back to that idol, then you're going to suffer consequences from worshiping another God beside me. And I think that is very applicable to the way God would still treat an idol now. He would do something in our life saying, hey, you don't need that idol. That idol's nothing compared to me. Quit worshiping your money. Quit worshiping your job. And then there might be, if you continue to do it, you put it back, I want my idol. I want God and I want my idol. He knocks it down and he says something like, no. And he breaks the idol, and I've seen this happen, and I'm not saying that God causes it to break, like for people to lose their job or lose their money or anything like that. But sometimes the reality of the fact that we're worshiping other than God, that's just not good. and we lose that, and those idols break. Relationships fall apart, our heroes die, we get fired from our job, stuff like that. And then it says, then the Lord's heavy hand struck the people of Ashdod and the nearby villages with a plague of tumors. You're going to hear this word, the heavy hand, more than once over the next 2 chapters. It is kind of the glory of God is considered the heaviness of God, and it's like the presence of God. So the heaviness, the presence of God struck the people of Ashdod and nearby villages with a plague of tumors. And I think I told you all this last week. Keep losing my cursor here, but I think I told you this last week. But and it might say on your translation, didn't it say boils on yours, Henry, last week? Tumors. Somebody last week said boils, I think. But the best that they think that is that it's really not a tumor like inside your body or anything. It's like a tumor that's coming out of your body. And they think that it's a hemorrhoid, that all these people got like these tumors that were coming out of their body, like a hemorrhoid. And I mean, how miserable would that be? So now we're going to move on to chapter 7. When the people realized what was happening, they cried out, "We can't keep the ark of God of Israel here any longer. He is against us. We will be destroyed along with Dagon, our God." So they called together the rulers of the Philistine towns. These are those 5 rulers that I was talking about earlier, over the 5 towns. And so they called together the rulers of the Philistine towns, and they said, "What should we do with the ark of God of Israel?" The rulers discussed it. So the 5 rulers discussed it, and they said, "Move it to the town of Gath." So one of these rulers that was there was from Gath. And, the decision was made, move it to Gath. And I'm sure he wasn't too excited about that. But his fellow rulers said, so they talked about it. So they moved the ark of God of Israel to Gath. Verse 9, but when the ark arrived at Gath, the Lord's heavy hand fell on its men, young and old. He struck them with a plague of tumors, and there was great panic. So the same thing happened when they moved it to Gath, is that when it was there, God was like, "No, I don't want to be here either. You can't quit moving me around. I go where I want to go." Because you remember the way that the Ark of the Covenant was set up is that the Lord's presence was there to fire at night and a cloud during the day. And when he moved, that's when people packed up and moved shop and he left. And now here they are. They're like, "Hey, we're going to take you where, we're going to move you over here. We're going to move you over there." And God didn't like that. And his heavy hand fell on the people of Gath as well. So they started receiving the same tumors, the plague, and the people really started freaking out again. So now let's look at verse 9 or verse 7. No, verse 10. Sorry, verse 10. We're almost done. So they sent the ark of God to the town of Ekron. Okay, what did they do different this time than they did the first time? Well, the first time they gathered the leaders together and they said, "Hey, what are we going to do with this?" They discussed it. The 5 of those leaders said, "Oh, we're going to send it over there." Well, the leader of I'm sorry, what was the name of the last place it was? Gath. The leader of Gath was like, I'm not even gonna ask my 4 other leaders. We're just getting rid of it. So they sent the ark of God to the town of Ekron. So here Ekron is, and its leader, who was involved in the first conversation. They saw what happened at Ashdod. They saw what now is happening at Gath. And then all of a sudden, here comes the Ark of the Covenant, and it's coming straight to Ekron. But when the people of Ekron saw it coming, they cried out, they are bringing the ark of the God of Israel here to kill us too. They were not happy about it. They were like, no. The people summoned the Philistine leaders again. So here they are. They summoned them again. They say, hey, y'all got to get here. We don't want this. Y'all didn't want it. Y'all didn't want it. Now they're bringing it here. We don't. So called the leaders again. And they say this. They say, please send the ark of the God of Israel back to its own country, or it will kill us all. And that really shouldn't be it there. I don't know. Some of y'all translations might say, or he will kill us all. I don't know why in some of our translations it translates he. And when you look at it, it is clearly a he, but they translated it. Huh? Yeah. I looked through like 20 something different translations and they all said it. But when they're talking about this, and especially at the beginning of chapter 6, it's he, or he will kill us. And but they're saying, hey, don't send the presence of God into us, or he will kill us. For the deadly plague from God had already begun, and a great fear was sweeping across that town too. Those who didn't die were afflicted with tumors, and the cry from the town rose to heaven. So that's where we're going to stop today, is that the Philistines, they didn't want the ark of God. They didn't want it in their presence because it was doing damage to them. And as long as they had the ark of God, the covenant of God there in their presence, is doing damage to them. People were dying. People were getting these horrible boils, tumors, and there was a great fear sweeping across this country. So as I close, let me quit sharing my screen here. But as I close, one of the things that I want to talk about is, okay, day one, it goes to Ashdod, and falls down that night. Day two, they stand it up. It falls down and breaks in half. We don't want it anymore. They send it over to Gath. They send it to Gath. It's not in Gath very long either. And they say, no, we don't want it. We're going to send it to Ekron. So in my mind, travel time and all this, I mean, I think I read somewhere that it was 8 miles between like the first city and where Israel was. This is real. Remember, Israel's a tiny country, 130 miles by 80, and Philistine is just a little sliver right next to it. It's not a huge country at all. So we're not, it's not a big place. So I would think, how long do you think that story took place? That's off the top of your head. For it to come to the first town for 2 days, for them to take it to the other town, them not like it, and then them to take it to the other town. And as it's coming into the town, they're saying, no, we want that. We got to get rid of it. We got to move it. I mean, I don't know, 2 weeks tops, a week, maybe 2 weeks. Not much time. It didn't take them long to say that we don't want this in our presence. So, but what we're going to learn next week is that they kept it for another 7 months, which blows my mind. Why they would, and we'll discuss that next week. I don't want to get into next week's. It's kind of like the plague in Egypt. And a lot of this is very similar when we, especially next week, when we read about this, the Philistines were very, very aware of how God delivered the Israelite people from Egypt. They knew of the plagues. They knew, and next week they're even going to mention it. The Philistines are even going to mention it. But so they are very well aware of that narrative and how God delivered the nation of Israel. And the fact that they wait, and we'll talk about this again next week, but I just think it's the fact that they wait 6 or 7 months. It's kind of like when Pharaoh, and they have the plagues of the frogs. I don't know if you remember this, but Moses goes in and Pharaoh's like, I've had enough, get rid of the frogs. And Moses says, oh, okay, I'll pray and get rid of the frogs. And this is, there's frogs everywhere, like in their beds, everywhere. There's frogs everywhere. And Moses asked this question, when would you like me to get rid of the frogs? And Pharaoh responds, oh, just do it tomorrow. And it blows my mind why he didn't say, do it right now. Do it right now. But when we look at, not really that curse, but when we look at idols, there are times in our life that I think that we know that we're supposed to get rid of things in our life, that we need to quit putting that above God. We need to quit paying that much attention. But for some reason, we hold on to it. We hold on to, even when we know that it's not right, that God doesn't want that, and we still hold on. We still hold on. So granted, God, Ark of the Covenant is not an idol, but I find it interesting that the Philistines viewed it as just another idol. They were putting it in there. It was like a trophy for them. And so I think the lesson that we can learn is we just need to make sure to, when God points out idols in our life that fall down in front of us, we need to go, do I need to be paying that much attention, or do I need to be putting that in front of God? So, any questions or comments on the lesson today? Yeah. Why didn't they bow down and start praying to God? Yeah. Yeah.
You know how powerful he is. Why wouldn't they just change God?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's just a cultural thing. I don't know. I guess that wasn't there. I don't know. You'd think that they go, oh, you're the real God. We need to worship you. But they didn't. Yeah. 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 They said, why didn't the people of the Philistines just bow down and start worshiping God? That's a good question. Why not? Well, why don't we? Yeah, why don't we? Any other questions or comments? Y'all got anything online? All right. I'm going to go ahead and.
Does it say anywhere in the Bible where it actually went to, where it ended up at?
Well, we'll talk about that next week. It doesn't say in the Bible where it went, but it did stay in Philistine, in the Philistine. I don't know. How do you say the nation?
Somewhere still.
Yeah, I think it probably was just out in the country somewhere.
They think it's in town of Austin, in the St. Mary of Zone.
You mean where was it in the time of the story, or where it is right now? Oh, we don't know where the Ark of the Covenant is. Yeah. Yeah. If we knew where the Ark of the Covenant was, it'd be a completely different ballgame right now. But yeah. Yeah. We don't, trust me, we don't know where the Ark of the Covenant is. Yeah. Because I've been to where the temple was, and there's a lot of people that want to rebuild the temple and put the Ark of the Covenant in their place. But the main problem they don't rebuild the temple is because they don't have the Ark of the Covenant. I mean, if we knew where the Ark of the Covenant was, it'd be a big deal. But because it disappeared in I guess 70 AD, or when the Babylonians came in and wiped it out. When the Babylonians came in and wiped them out, but not in 70 AD, but the one before that. That's when the Ark of the Covenant was destroyed and never did come back. But